Thank you very much. And thank you, Camilla, for the introduction and for the invitation. I'm very glad to be part of this seminar series. So, as you mentioned, I lead an INRIA INSERM team named PreMedical, which is composed of researchers in statistics, machine learning, but also clinicians. And PreMedical stands for Personalized Medicine by Data Integration and Causal Learning. And one of the objective of the team is to develop and deploy decision support tools while quantifying the uncertainty associated with the decisions. And this is currently what we are doing with collaborations with ICU clinicians who take care of trauma patients. So it's patients suffering from brain injuries or hemorrhagic shock resulting from car accidents, falls, and stab wounds. And we are currently launching a randomized controlled trials to validate the machine learning models we have developed in real time. So it means that half of the French ambulances will be equipped with predictive models to predict patients' outcomes, anticipate resources, and for a better orientation and triage of patients. Another objective of the team, which will be the topic of the talk today, is to personalize the recommendation of treatments through causal learning. And I can use the same example to illustrate this topic because beyond predictive questions, the clinicians wonder whether or not they should administrate a specific treatment. So here, for instance, it's the administration of tranexamic acid to improve mortality for brain trauma patients. So the rationale is that this drug is known to reduce extra bleeding, and here we focus on intracranial bleeding. And so we can formulate this question as a causal inference question, because I want to study the causal effect of the administration of tranexamic acid on mortality. And consequently, I can use the classical potential outcome framework to answer such questions. So I will consider that I have covariates denoted as X, a binary treatment W, and my potential outcomes Y1 and Y0 corresponding to the outcomes we would have observed when treated or not. So if I want to recommend a drug to someone, I am interested in its individual causal effect, which can be written as the difference between the two potential outcomes. But of course, this quantity is never observed because each patient is either treated or not. So that's why in my data table, here I have some question marks because my first patient is treated, W equal 1, and so I observe its outcome when treated. So even though I cannot directly estimate the individual effect of the treatment, I can estimate related quantities, such as the average treatment effect. And as its name indicates, it's simply the effect of your treatment in average over your population. So it can be written and expressed using the risk difference, where you will compute the difference of the average outcome at everyone got treated and the average outcome at nobody got treatment. And to estimate such an average treatment effect, you can use different data sources, such as randomized controlled trials, which is really like the gold standard to assess the effect of the treatment, because basically you just flip a coin to assign the treatment. So you are sure that what you see is the effect of the treatment and not the effect of something else. So basically, the asymptotic distributions of the covariates for the treated and the control is the same. So the mean of the age, for instance, for the treated is the same as the mean of the age for the control. However, randomized controlled trials are known to have a lot of limitations. So they are expensive. It can be long to set up a trial. So sometimes you just don't have time, like during COVID. And in addition, there are strong inclusion and exclusion criteria. And consequently, you may fear that your trial sample is really different from the population which may beneficiate for the treatment. So for instance, in trials, you do not have pregnant women, you do not have people with comorbidities and so on. And a student who has been working for a company designing trials was saying to me that in fact she only has white firemen in trials. So there are other like data sources that you can use to assess the effect of a treatment, such as observational data. So it's data collected in routine in hospitals, like electronic health records or cohort. So it may be more abundant, in a way less costly, and more representative of your population of interest. But because you do not control the allocation of the treatment, you may fear that you will have some bias, and in particular, some confounding bias. Because if it turned out that you have given your treatment to more young patients and that younger patients are, for instance, less likely to die, then you need to be able to disentangle the effect of the age to the one of your treatment. So that's why there is a growing interest in combining both RCT and observational data to combine their strengths and tackle their weaknesses. And in the pre-medical team, in particular, we focus on developing methods to generalize the effect of a treatment learned from an RCT to a target population. So an extreme example of the usage of such method is the example of the drug Ibrance, where its efficiency has been demonstrated on a trial on women, but the FDA has greenlighted its usage on men. So a population that has not been studied with an RCT. So you are really able to predict the effect of a treatment in a population which has not been studied with an RCT. And such a method may be interesting and may have like an economical impact. So for instance, in France, a part of the price of the reimbursement of drugs is based on its efficiency. So if you are able to predict the effect of a treatment in a population, a kind of real-world population, it may be interesting also for that. So this line of works where we combine one RCT and one observational data has started with two former students, Bénédicte Colnet and Imke Meyer. And to be more formal, I will consider that I have a trial with n observations. And in my trial, I have some covariates, X. I have my binary treatment, W, and my outcome, Y. And I denote PR of X, the probability of observing individuals with characteristics X equal X. And I have also access to a sample of the target populations with M individuals. And in my target populations, I only have access to the features, to the covariates X. And if we suppose that the covariates distribution is not the same in the RCT and in the target population, then the average treatment effect in the RCT will be different than the average treatment effect in the target population. So here it is there is an index with R for the RCT and T for the target. So I have a small graph to represent this. So here I have the probability of death, which depends on age. So I have an heterogeneous treatment effect. So the effect of my treatment depends on age. I have a curve for treated, a curve for control. And if it turns out that in your trial, you have sampled more individual with a medium age, then you will basically see a positive effect of your treatment here because it decreases mortality. But if in your target populations, you have sampled more people who are young and who are old, then basically you will see an effect of the treatment which is quasi null. So if your effect of the treatment depends on age and age is different in two populations, it makes sense that you will see different treatment effects in the two different populations. So to be able to really predict the effect of my treatment from the RCT to generalize it from the RCT to the target population, I need to have some identifiability assumption. And the first one is an overlap assumption. So it can really be seen as a counterpart of the classical identifiability assumptions that you will find in a classical causal inference for observational studies. And here, these overlap assumptions means that the support of the distributions of your features in the target population is included in the support of the distributions of your features in your trial. So it's quite a strong assumption because in a way it means that you allow some shift, some distributional shift between two distributions, but not all the shift, and in particular, no extrapolations. And in the team, we are trying hard to get rid of these assumptions, but it's not so easy. And the second assumption is transportability of the conditional average treatment effect. So the effect of your treatment depends on covariates, and we assume that it depends on covariates in the same way in the trial and in the target population. So tau R of X is equal to tau T of X. So the effect of your treatment depends on age, depends on age in the same way in your target and in your trial population. And using these two identifiability assumptions, you can identify your treatment effect in your target population and then estimate it. So here I have written one identifiability formula. So I just write my quantity of interest, the average treatment effect in the target population. So here I do nothing, I just use the law of total expectation. On the second line, I use transportability of the KTE, and to go in the third line, I use the overlap. So once we see this expression, we can deduce an estimator easily. And a very well-known estimator for this task is inverse probability sampling weighting estimator. So this can be really seen as a counterpart of IPW estimators. So if we do not look at this orange term, then we can recognize the classical Horvitz-Thompson estimators because pi is my probability to be treated. So basically, I have the average outcome when treated minus average outcome when control. And then I will reweight this estimator by the ratios of densities. So this is in a way very intuitive because what you do if you want to predict and generalize your treatment effect is that you are just going to reweight the RCT so that it looks like your target population. So if you have, I don't know, an RCT in France and you want to predict the effect of your treatment in the US, you are going to reweight the French so that they look like the Americans. Okay. And to compute this estimator, you need to estimate this ratio of densities. And in the literature, there are different approaches to do so. So one consists in assuming parametric models for both the numerators and the denominator. So for instance, you can assume a Gaussian distribution for the numerator and the denominator. Another one consists in assuming a parametric models for the ratio. And a third one that we have used consists in using a logistic regression. So more precisely, I will just introduce a new notation for convenience, and I will denote S equals 0, the membership to the target, T, and S equals 1, the membership to the trial. And then I will use Bayes formulae to have these expressions. And the probability to be in the trial can be identifiable and estimated using the proportion of observation in the trial. So the number of observation in my trial n divided by the total number of observations, so number of observations in the trial plus number of observations in my target population. And then the probability to be in the trial probability that S equal 1 given X can be estimated using a logistic regression. So simply, you are going to consider that you have an outcome variable, which is a membership to the trial or to the target, and you are going to perform a logistic regression using this outcome on the features. And so once you have estimated the ratio of densities, we have in fact given the statistical properties of this estimator that I will describe just a bit later, and in particular its variance. Okay, so we have applied these estimators and others to generalize the effect of tranexamic acid, learn from an RCT, so it's a CRASH-3 RCT, which is a huge RCT with 90,000 individuals, a multicentric ones, and we want to predict the effect of the treatment from this RCT to an observational samples, here reflected with the trauma-based data. And I have displayed the results here. And in blue, I have the results obtained using only the RCT, where I compute the effect of my treatment using difference in means or difference in conditional means to improve on variance. In purple, here I have the effect of my treatment using only the observational data, because it turns out that in this observational data, I have access to the treatment and to the outcome. So I can do this. And you can see that it differs. So in the trial, your average treatment effect is negative. Here, the outcome is mortality. So negative average treatment effect means that the effect of the treatment is slightly beneficial. So I say slightly because it's like negative, but nearly significant. And in your observational data, your treatment effect is deleterious. So it's not a problem because, as I mentioned, if the two populations are different, which is the case, you can expect such results. And then in peak, I have the results of the different generalization estimators. So for instance, the IPSW estimator that I have just presented is here, but you have also other versions because as usual, you can have also regression versions, weighting versions, and also kind of doubly robust methods combining both regression and weighting methods. And in addition, you have different choices because to estimate nuisance parameters, you can go for parametric methods or non-parametric methods. And when I see all these results, you can see that it's not necessarily so easy to be able to conclude with confidence on the effect of your treatment in your target populations. And for me, it makes sense because even though these methods are very promising, I still think that there is a lot of a need for a lot of research to be able to deploy such methods with confidence. Because, for instance, as soon as you combine one RCT and one observational data, you may have some feature mismatch. So, for instance, here in my picture, I do not have the feature X3 in the trial. And so it may lead to identifiability issues in such a setting. Then you may also have like sporadic missing values in both the trial and the observational data that you need to take into account. You may need to select which covariate you are going to include in all your models. And in fact, when I have presented these results to the clinicians, they say, okay, but in fact, you have used the risk difference and we are interested in the risk ratio. So that's why it is true that, in fact, we have used an absolute measures to measure the effect of the treatment with the risk difference, and there are other absolute measures that exist, but we could have used like relative measures like the risk ratio, so the expectation of your potential outcome when treated divided by the expectation of your potential outcome when controlled, and there are other relative measures such as survival ratio, odds ratio, and so on. And it turned out that depending on which measure you use, it may give really different impressions on the effect of your treatment. So to illustrate these points, let's consider another example where I have a trial, I have an outcome y equal 1 if I have a stroke, y equal 0 when I have no stroke, w a treatment, and I have the features, x, here blood pressures, which can be categorized in two categories. So x equal 1 corresponds to a low baseline risk. So basically, the probability to have a stroke, given the fact that you are in this x equal 1, is very low. And here, we have represented all the results. So all corresponds to the effect of your treatment in your trial. And then I have the effect of the treatment in the different strata, x equal 1 and x equal 0. So if I look at risk difference in my trial, I can say that, okay, treatment reduced by 0.045 the probability to suffer from stroke. If I look at the risk ratio, we can say, okay, the treated has 0.6 times the risk of having a stroke in comparison to the controls. So I'm not sure it's so helpful to really appreciate like the intensity of the effect of the treatment, but maybe what is a bit more puzzling at first is that the effect of the treatment is heterogeneous when you look at the risk difference scale, while the effect of the treatment is homogeneous when you look at the risk ratio scale. So it may be a bit puzzling at first because you can say, imagine your feature is X, you can say is H. You can say, okay, the effect of your treatment is heterogeneous, so depends on age if you look at risk difference. But if you look at the risk ratio, no, the effect of the treatment is homogeneous and does not depend on age. And in addition, we may feel that there may be an impact of the baseline risk, and in a way, like baseline risk can be a bit entangled with the effect of the treatment. And so if I look at another examples, where I assume that I have a 3% baseline mortality, which is reduced to 1% mortality using the treatment, the risk difference will show the 0.02 drop, while risk ratio will show that the probability to die when you are controlled is 3 times the probability to die when you are treated. So the risk difference may suggest a very tiny effect, while the risk ratio suggests a larger one. So that's why, depending on who you are and what are your interests, you may decide to present one measure over another one. So that's why the choice of a causal measure is really actively discussed. And that's also why there are recommendations, and in particular, the consort guidelines recommends you to present both relative and absolute measures. And that's also why we have decided to study carefully the mathematical properties of all these causal measures to see if we can rationalize, formalize, and provide guidance to help the user on their choice. So the first interesting property that you can ask for a causal measure is collapsibility. So collapsibility means that the population effect is equal to weighted sum of local effects. And in particular, direct collapsibility means that the weights are equal to the population's proportion. So for instance, the risk difference is directly collapsible. So it means that you can retrieve your marginal effect, the effect on your populations, simply as follows. So here I will compute the proportion of individuals with X equal 1, and I will multiply it by the effect of the treatment in this strata X equal 1, plus the proportion of individuals with X equals 0 multiplied by the effect of the treatment in the strata X equals 0. And in terms of generalizability, we can see that it may be useful because if you have another population, you may replace the proportion of observations with X equal 1 in your population by the proportion of observation with X equal 1 in another population. So this was direct collapsibility. Now, if I just have collapsibility, I can have this, but the weights will depend on the baseline distribution, so on the distribution of your potential outcome when controlled. So for instance, the risk ratio is not directly collapsible, but it is only collapsible. And the collapsibility weights depends on your baseline risk, so expectation of Y0 given X and expectation of Y0. So it means that if you have the risk ratio on different strata, then if you want to retrieve your population risk ratio, you need to have access to the distribution of your potential outcome when controlled. And just as a note, even though there are recommendations to say that you need to use absolute and relative measures when you display effect of the treatments, it turned out that we have found no methods and neither theoretical studies for the risk ratio. And consequently, we have provided estimators of the risk ratio, both for RCT and observational data, weighting method, regression method, and doubly robust methods. And we have studied its statistical properties. So here I have summarized the statistical properties of the different causal measures that I have mentioned, so collapsibility, direct collapsibility. There is also another one that we can call logic respecting. So logic respecting means that your marginal effect is not comprised in between the minimum and the maximum of the local effects. So for instance, the odds ratio is not logic respecting because you can have an overall odds ratio for your population equal, for instance, to 0.26, and then an odds ratio for men of 0.16 and an odds ratio for women of 0.16. So here we can see that the odds ratio does not seem to enjoy many nice properties. It's not directly collapsible, neither collapsible nor logic respecting, whereas the risk difference is collapsible and logic respecting. So now I can go back to the generalization because my aim was to predict the effect of my treatment from the RCT to the observational data. And it turns out that these statistical properties of these causal measures are really useful when it goes back to when it turns out to generalizations. So in particular, the identifiability formula that I have presented to you was valid only if your measure is collapsible. So this was this one with weight equal to 1 because it was for the risk difference. And consequently, if you want to generalize a measure which is not collapsible, you should resort to another identifiability formula, which in fact implies that you should require to have other identifiability assumptions. And in particular, you will not assume transportability of the conditional average treatment effect, but transportability of the conditional expectation of y given x. So the conditional expectation of y given x in the trial is equal to the conditional expectation of y given x in the target population. And this is a stronger assumption because basically it implies that you do not need to have access to all the features which are treatment effect modifiers, which modifies the effect of your treatment. But here, for this set of assumptions, you need to have access to all the features that are related to your outcome. Okay. And also, just a remark that if you want to generalize a measure which is also collapsible but not directly collapsible, still you need to have access to the distribution of your outcome, of your potential outcome, y0, which is a quite also a strong assumption. Okay, so now if I want to generalize all the causal measures that I have presented that are not all collapsible, I will use this second set of assumptions. And to be able to generalize the generalization of all these causal measures, I will introduce another property for a causal measure. And in particular, I will define what I call the first moment population measure. So a population level measure is a causal measure that will depend only on the marginal distribution of your potential outcome, so the distribution of y1 and y0. And a first moment population level measure is a causal measure which depends on the first moment, so on the expectation of y1 and the expectation of y0. And so I can write all the causal measures that I have presented, risk difference, risk ratio, odds ratio, as a function of the expectation of both potential outcomes. So this function phi will be x minus 1 y if I am with the risk difference, x over y if I have the risk ratio, etc. And a population level measure is defined in opposition to what is called an individual level measure, which depends on the joint distribution of the potential outcomes, so which is often considered as being non-identifiable. So for instance, for the risk ratio, the population level measure is expectation of y1 divided by expectation of y0, whereas an individual measure will be the expectation of the individual ratios. And when you start thinking a bit about it, it may be still also a bit confusing because you may wonder, okay, what is an average treatment effect? Because in this setting, the average of kind of individual's effect is not equal to the average effect due to the nonlinearity of the measure. So now I consider that I have first moment population level causal measures, and I can, under the assumption of transportability of the conditional expectation, generalize all these measures using the same formulae. And this formulae, you will retrieve the phi corresponding to the different measures. And in fact, it will also be a simple reweighting of Horvitz-Thompson classical estimators in trials with weight which depends on the ratio of densities. And I have detailed here the variance corresponding to each causal measure. So basically, using these expressions, I am able to generalize all causal measures that are first moment population causal measures. And so we have done some numerical experiments to check the results under kind of simple linear regression models, where I have a simple shift in the distribution of the covariates because here only the mean differs and the covariance matrix are the same. And we have displayed this reweighted Horvitz-Thompson Reweighted Neyman is simply when I estimate the probability in the trial to be treated. And we have also derived like the other versions, the regression-based versions like G-formula, and also the doubly robust methods, combining regressions and weighting using efficient influence theory, but I have not presented these estimators. And so we can generalize the risk difference, we can generalize the risk ratio, we can generalize the odds ratio. So in red, I have the target treatment effect in my population, and in blue, I have the source effect, and we see that we can appropriately target the good quantity. Okay. So for now, what I have done is that I have combined one RCT and one observational data and generalized the effect of the treatment from one RCT to one sample of the observational data using the features. But it turns out that in reality, often I just don't have only one RCT, but I may have many RCTs because I have RCTs from different countries, I have RCTs from different years. And when you have many RCTs, like meta-analysis, which consist in aggregating the results from different RCTs, it is really at the top of the pyramid of evidence-based medicines. So it makes sense because in a way, meta-analysis is a solution to tackle some limitations of an RCT. So for instance, such as sample size, because you have more RCT and so more sample size. But still, meta-analysis face significant challenges. So first, we have seen that it's not necessarily easy to aggregate causal measures. And in particular, it's kind of impossible to aggregate causal measures if they are not collapsible like the odds ratio. Then you have to take into account the heterogeneity between the studies. And finally, due to data silos and data regulations, you cannot share individual level data easily. So it's difficult to do meta-analysis on individual level data. So that's why we have considered like federated causal inference to be able to bridge causal inference and federated learning to estimate treatment effects from decentralized data. And so it can be seen as a really compelling alternative to causal inference, meta-analysis, because federated learnings allows you to learn from the decentralized data, but still outputting a result as if the data would have been centralized. So more precisely, federated learning works as follows. So with a central server that will communicate with your different hospitals, so your different trials. And so the central server starts with an initial value for the parameters, send it to each hospital. Each hospital will update the value of this parameter using its own data and send the update to the central server for aggregation. So send only the parameters and do not send the data. And then this process is iterated. So this can be really seen as a meta-analysis on individual data, but without sharing the data. So to be a bit more concrete, I will present you how federated learning can be used if you just want to perform a simple linear regression. So your aim will be just to do a linear regression, but on decentralized data. And federated learning works well as soon as you have algorithms and methods that can be used with gradient descent. So first, I will show how we can do gradient descent for a linear regression. So if you want to do gradient descent for linear regression, you start by initializing some values for your beta parameters of your regression. Then you perform your gradient set. So you update the value of your beta parameter in your regressions using the former value of your parameters minus learning rate and the gradient of your loss. And here your loss is simply the mean square error. And then you will repeat these steps and L times. And if L is basically very large, then you will end up with the classical OLS solution. And there are some theoretical arguments to be able to guide you for the tuning parameters that you have to specify, such as the learning rate. So this is just gradient descent to do simple linear regressions. Now, if you want to do federated learning with gradient descent for linear regressions, it will work as follows. So now I assume that I have a server, I have my K hospital, and what is interesting is that your mean square error loss can be easily split into your K site. So it can be written as follows, and small lk represents the loss on your site. And as soon as your loss can be splitted in K site, it's very easy to do federated learning. So it will work as follows. So you will have your server that will initialize your beta regression parameters. It will send the beta parameters to each site. And then each site will perform here one gradient step to update the value of the parameter using its own data and its loss, and the gradient of its loss. So that's why I have the gradient of LK here. And then the sites are going to send back the updated values of the parameter to the server for aggregation, and this process will be repeated. So this communication will be repeated between sites and server T times. So here you also have to set some tuning parameters, such as the learning rate, the communication round T, and L. Here I have selected L equal to 1, so I perform only one gradient step. If I would have chosen like L equal to infinity, it is called one-shot federated learning, but we can also see this as a kind of meta-analysis on the regression coefficients, because it means that each site is going to perform full gradient descent. So it means that each site is going to estimate its beta parameter, like using an OLS regression, and then you will just aggregate the beta coefficients. So it's really a meta-analysis on the beta parameters. So I hope it is a bit more concrete to see how federated learning works to do a simple linear regressions. And now we are going to consider our setting, where in fact I have K decentralized and potentially heterogeneous randomized controlled trial. And my aim is to estimate the effect of the treatment, which with the populations is defined by all the sites. So my population is really defined as a mixture of all my trials. And we will consider different scenarios of heterogeneity. Heterogeneity in treatment allocations. So basically, you can have different probability to be treated in each trials. Heterogeneity in covariate distributions. You can have different populations, so shift in covariate distribution between all the trials. And heterogeneity in terms of presence of center effects. So you may have different practices, different organizational contexts, which may result in different values in the outcome. And so we are going to compare three types of federated estimators, and we will compare them to the baseline, which will be the pool estimator, as if the data would have been centralized. And so to estimate the effect of my treatment on the pool data set, I use difference in conditional expectations, so difference in regression, so the regression for the treated minus the regression for the control, just to improve a bit on variance. And so we will compare meta-analyses. So meta-analyses, for meta-analysis, like each site is going to estimate its regression coefficient. Each site is going to estimate its average treatment effect, so tau1 at and tau k at. And then each site is going to send it to the server for aggregation. And you can aggregate using sample size weights or classical inverse variance weights, okay, for a fixed effect meta-analysis. Then we also have like one-shot federated learning. So for one-shot federated learning, each site computes its regression coefficients. Then the regression coefficients are aggregated by the server, send it back to each site. So it means that you have a global regression parameters, and using this global regression parameter, each site can compute its average treatment effect using this global regression parameter and its own data. So then you will, at the end, aggregate also the average treatment effect from each site. And the last method is gradient-based federated learning. So here it means that you will learn your regression coefficient using federated learning and gradient-based method. So from decentralized data, but you have a result as if it was centralized. You have your general global regression parameters that is sent back again to each site. And with their own data, they estimate the average treatment effect to 1 hat and to k hat with this global regression parameter. And then it is sent to the server for aggregations. And we have compared these three different versions and these three different estimators in terms of statistical performance and communication cost. So first here I consider the setting where I just have heterogeneity in treatment allocation, so different probability pi k, pk to be treated in each trial. And we can, in this setting, like all the different estimators will be unbiased to estimate your average treatment effect. And they will differ in terms of variance. So in particular, the gradient descent-based methods and the one-shot methods have the same variance as the pool estimator, if you have your centralized data. And the variance of the meta-analysis is a bit worse. So it's a bit difficult to parse this expression, but basically, as soon as the probability to be treated in the trials are different, then their variance will be a bit larger. So we can see this in simulation. So here I have 5 studies, 10 features, 50 observations within each study, and different probability to be treated in each trial. And as I mentioned, like the pool estimator and the gradient descent and the one-shot are very similar, but the meta-analysis in yellow here have a slightly larger variance. So I will keep the heterogeneity in covariate distributions just to focus on the heterogeneity from different center effects and to model the fact that we can have different practices and different organizational context. We have simply added like a constant in the regression model. So here you have your linear regression model, and I will have a different constant for each hospital, for each site. So doing so, I still have the fact that the conditional average treatment effect are the same from one site to another, because this will disappear when you will do y1 minus y0, but the conditional expectation of y given x will be different in each site. Just as a remark here, in fact, I am not anymore in an RCT setting because H can be seen as a confounder, and consequently, you need to adjust for H, otherwise you will have some bias. So even for the pool estimator, you need to add the variable H as a features, not to be biased. And so you will need to do the same thing if you do gradient descent. But if you do your meta-analysis, in fact, it will handle this naturally because you stratify naturally on the hospital variable. So here we have some results when we can see that, as I mentioned, if I do nothing and if I forgot, of course, to put the confounder, I will be biased, except for meta-analysis in yellow. But if I adjust, then I will not be biased, and all the methods target the appropriate quantity with approximately the same variance. So we have tried to kind of summarize all this to provide a decision diagram for practitioners, just to be able to guide them to know which method they could use depending on the different scenarios. Because basically it makes sense that all these methods are different regimes of predilections. So the match is more between meta-analysis and gradient descent federated learning. I exclude a bit one shot. And so, for instance, if you have a small sample size, I try to summarize like the outputs, then you should go for gradient descent. Because to be able to perform meta-analysis, you need to be able to perform your regression on each site, and consequently, you need to have more observations than the number of features in each site. Whereas for gradient descent, you need just that the sum of the number of observations per site is greater than the number of features. So gradient descent and federated learning is very useful, in fact, when you have really like sites, hospitals with small sample size. When it comes to heterogeneity, it's a bit more subtle. So basically, as I mentioned, if you have different baseline outcomes, then meta-analysis will handle it naturally. Whereas for gradient descent, you need adjustment. So adjustment means you need a priori knowledge on the potential underlying model. Then finally, if you have a non-collapsible measure, so the algorithm that I have presented did to you for federated learning, it was for collapsible measure. But if I have non-collapsibility, I cannot go for meta-analysis, but I can use federated learning and gradient descent with a slightly different versions of the algorithm that I have presented to you. And so I have mentioned like both federated causal inference and generalization. And to conclude, I would like to say that in fact, these problems are really, from my point of view, much more similar than meet the eyes. So when you consider federated learning, it can be really seen as a generalization problem where your target population is defined as a mixture of the different sites. You just have your target population, which is considering all the sites. And we can see it a bit more easily when we do federated learning with observational data that I have not described here. So here I have a global propensity score, and which can be written as a weighted sum of local propensity score, EK. And when you look at the weights, you will recognize a density ratio. So where you have the distribution of your feature in one site divided by the distribution of the features in your target population, which is here composed of all the sites. Okay, and in both problems, you will find exactly the same assumptions of transportability of your conditional average treatment effect or transportability of your conditional expectations, and you will find the same dichotomy of approaches between collapsible and non-collapsible measures with different methods to do so. So now the next steps are the following one. We have done one RCT, one observational data, many RCTs, many observational data, and now we will do many RCTs and many observational data. We are in the process of implementing all this in a package. And also, there are also extensions to measures that are population level measure and not first moment population level measures. So measures that depend on the distribution of the potential outcome and not on the expectation, like the win ratio. So it was in the title at the beginning, but it would have been too much. And we are also adding some privacy guarantees. So to conclude, I would like to thank like the collaborators, and in particular Clément, Ahmed, and Erwan for the generalization part, and Rémi and Aurélien for the federated learning part. So thank you very much.